Okay, so today we're going to go over solving two-step equations. And the reason why they're called two-step equations is because you have to undo two operations. So remember, order of operations, we do multiplication, division first, and adding and subtracting last. So when we're solving for equations, we want to work backwards. We actually want to undo adding and subtracting first. So we're going to undo adding and subtracting first, and then we're going to undo multiplication, division second, right? Because we're doing the order of operations backwards. So we actually want to undo adding and subtracting first, and then we're going to undo multiplication and division by doing the inverse operations. So in problem number 1, we have -6 times what number plus 2 equals -16. That's what we're trying to solve. So -6 times what number plus 2 would equal -16. So the first thing we want to do is we want to isolate the term that has the variable in it. So we want to undo the adding or subtracting first. So we have to undo adding. So to undo adding, we're going to do the inverse operation, which would be subtracting. And then if we do that, line up your equals. So 2 plus -2, that's 0. And 0 plus a -6x, so that leaves you just a -6x on this side. And then -6 minus 2 is -18. And now we can undo the multiplication. So we can undo multiplication by using the inverse operation. And the inverse of multiplying is dividing. And we're going to show division using a division bar, right? That's how we're going to show division. We're not going to use the elementary division bar. And we're going to divide both sides by -6. Line up your equals. So -6 divided by -6 is just 1, and 1 times x is x. And then a negative divided by a negative is positive. 18 divided by 6 is 3. So now let's check our work. So when you check your work, you want to go back up to the original equation, and we want to check to see so remember we were doing -6 times what number plus 2, what number would that be that would equal -16? So we're going to take x equals -3 is what we think is the correct answer. So we're going to verify it, or we're going to check it, right? We're going to check it or verify that it works. When you're verifying, you want to see if you get the same number on both sides. So we want to do order of operations, because now we're not solving, now we're evaluating. And when we're evaluating, you have to do multiplication first, right? So that's -18. And then we can do the addition, just like we did earlier in the week. We did order of operations for this reason. You got to multiply first, and then -18 plus 2 is -16. See, you have the same thing on both sides. So that means we did have the right answer, right? So check. It is correct, right? We do have the right answer. So x equals 3 is the correct answer. So that's your check. And so you have to show your check too. So we didn't give you very many problems tonight because you have to show your check. So when you show your check, again, you're going back into the original equation and you're doing order of operations, and you're seeing if you have the same number on each side. And we had -16 on this side, and we had -16 on that side. So that means we had the right answer. Okay, so let's look at number 2. Number 2, you want to go to the side that has the variable, and we have two terms. This term has the variable in it, so we want to isolate that term. So when we're solving, we're doing the order of operations in reverse, right? So when we're solving, we have to undo the adding and subtracting part first. So since we're subtracting by 3, then we're going to do the inverse operation, and we're going to add by 3. So we always, when we're solving, we want to undo the adding and subtracting first. -3 plus 3 is 0, and 0 plus anything just leaves you the n divided by -5 on the left-hand side. And then 2 plus 3 is 5 on this side. Right? Do you get why they call it two steps? So that's our first step, was to add 3 to both sides, right? And then we have to undo dividing by a -5. So we're going to multiply, because the inverse operation of dividing is multiply. So we're going to multiply both sides by a -5. So I'm just going to So we could either put parentheses or we could put a dot. Normally don't put both. I'm just kind of emphasizing that. And then -5 divided by -5, so that leaves you just n, because that's really like a 1 underneath there. And then 5 times -5 is -25. So that's what we think the answer is. We think that n should be replaced with -25 to make a true sentence. So notice we did two undo steps. We added 3 to both sides, and then we multiplied by -5 to both sides. So that's why they call it a two-step equation. And you have to show your 2 steps one at a time. So let's check it out. So we had a number divided by -5 minus 3 equals question mark. Does that really equal 2? And we think the answer that n should be -25. So notice I took the original problem and I recopied it, replacing the n with -25. And we want to see if we get the same answer on both sides. So now we're evaluating the left-hand side using order of operations. So order of operations says I have to do division first. So -25 divided by -5 is +5. And then 5 minus 3 is 2. That's the reason why we had you guys practice your order of operations skills back in the first couple weeks of school. So notice that we get the same answer on both sides. So that means we did it right. That means it is correct, right? We have the right answer. It worked, right? It's correct. So that means this is the answer. So we do have the correct answer, right? Two-step equations. You have 2 mathematical steps to undo. When you're undoing, you always undo the adding and subtracting component first. So notice in example number 3, there's like an imaginary -1 right there, right? That's called the coefficient, right? That's the coefficient. So we want to get the variable to be isolated. So we have to undo the 8. So we have to undo that you're adding 8. So we're going to undo 8 by subtracting 8 or adding a -8, whichever way you want to look at it. Because our goal, right, this is 0. When you add opposites, you get 0, and 0 minus 1n is just -1n. So that looks a little sloppy, right? So the fact that when you add opposites, you get 0, and that leaves you -1n on this side. And on the other side, you got -4 plus a -8, that's -12. So there's our one step. There's our first step of our undo step. Now we have to undo the multiplying by -1, and we can do that by dividing by -1. So that's our second undo step. That's why they call them two steps equations. And then line up your equals. A -12 divided by -1 is +12. And then -1 divided by -1 is just 1n or just n. So we think the answer is n should be replaced with 12. So let's check it. When you check it, you go back to the original problem. So the original problem was -4 equals, question mark does it, 8 minus, and where n used to be, we're putting a 12 where n used to be. And then we're doing this side of the equation, right? We can change subtraction to add the opposite, so that gives us -4 on this side, and sure enough, we had -4 on this side. So we ended up getting the same answer on both sides. So that means it worked. It made it a true sentence, therefore we do have the right answer. So we didn't make a mistake. Now, if this didn't come out correct and it wasn't true, that means we made a mistake. So if you're checking your answer and you get like 5 equals 2, well, that's not true. Or -4 equals +4, that's not true. So that means somewhere you made a mistake in your work and you'd have to try to look for it. And that sometimes can be difficult, right? So if your check doesn't work, that just means you made an error somewhere. And you go look for your error. Maybe it was an integer error. Maybe it was an undo error. And then you can let us know in Zoom, and then maybe we could go over it and see if we can find your error. Okay, number 4 is 9 plus 1/2 times what number equals 2? So we're trying to figure out what number could we replace k with that would make that a true sentence. So we're going to use algebra to undo it to get k by itself. So we want to get the k term to be isolated. So we have to undo 9 by subtracting 9 or adding a -9. because when you add opposites, right, you always get 0, and that leaves you 1/2 k. And then 2 minus 9 is -7. So that was our first step. Remember, the first step when you're using algebra is you're actually doing the order of operations backwards, right? You're doing the order of operations backwards. So when you're using algebra and you're undoing, we actually want to undo the adding and subtracting first, and then we'll undo multiplication division. So remember, we have a couple options here. Because we're multiplying by 1/2, we can divide both sides by 1/2, which we could do. And then, if we do that, that would be fine. Let me just show you that real quick. So over here, I'm going to be dividing by 1/2. So that'd be -7 divided by 1/2. Keep -7 the same, change division multiplication, reciprocate, and that gives you -14. So that gives you k equals -14. But remember, when you have a fractional coefficient, instead of dividing by 1/2, it's so much faster just to multiply by the reciprocal, right? So that's a really important technique to know. So instead of dividing by 1/2, it's just much smaller to multiply by the reciprocal. So what's the reciprocal of 1/2 would be 2. So just multiply both sides by 2, and then much easier, much faster. So we think the answer is -14. To really watch your signs. So let's check it. So when you check it, you go back to the original equation. So we had 9 plus 1/2 times some number. Does that equal 2? And we're going to put -14 where the k used to be. So now you understand why we've been doing the homework that we've been doing recently about substituting, evaluating, order of operations, right? Because you need that skill when we go on to other skills. So let's see what we have on both sides. Obviously, we have a 2 on the right-hand side. And now we have to do order of operations. So we have to multiply first. So 9 plus, and then a negative times a positive is a negative. And 1/2 times 14. Remember, when you're multiplying by 1/2, you're really just dividing by 2. So 1/2 times 14 would be 7. And then 9 plus 7 is 2. So see, we really did have the same answer on both sides. We have 2 on both sides. So that means we did it right. We did not make a mistake. It worked. Right? So solving a two-step equation by undoing the adding and subtracting first, then undoing the multiplication division, and then checking your answers by evaluating the expression to see if you get the same number on both sides.